Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and this week we will continue the talk on the science of play. And as we enter this new fall season and we transition our kids back into a more structured classroom, and that could simply be a more structured classroom in the home. If you're homeschooling, it is a daycare or a preschool setting or even a kindergarten setting. I'm really speaking to the parents who are in the midst of transitioning and helping their kids acclimate a new routine, a new schedule. And I really want to speak about play in depth and broadly at the same time, because like I mentioned last week, it is so vital to our well-being, our abilities to attend and focus and learn, and that play should be part of our whole lifelong journey. Last week, I began to introduce the study of play and the science of play. And I mentioned that there are 7 types of play that were originally outlined through Dr. Stuart Brown's research. And below, I'll link up his book again. But Dr. Brown is a clinical psychiatrist who founded the National Institute for Play, NIFP. And for over the last 30 years, he's been studying play for 50 years, but NIFP has been around for 30 years. And although he and a number of other remarkable neuroscientists have really dedicated their careers to the study of play behaviors and helping us understand its implications on individual children and humans, adults and children, and our overall well-being. It's really in the last several years, I'd say 6 to 8, maybe even 10 years, where it's gained some more traction. And I mentioned this last week. So I find it interesting that as we begin to try to recover and transition, from these last 2 years where our children's lives were turned upside down. Yes, everybody's lives were turned upside down, but I focus on the children, and they really have been impacted. And I think, as I've said numerous times before, it'll be 10, 20 years before we're really honest with ourselves and admit what happened. But without going there, I think that we, meaning those that work with children, that help support children, but as well as you parents who are in the thick of it, are beginning to really, really realize how our quote unquote systems, our educational systems, were slipping further and further away from a healthy balance where we support and nurture by shaping our children's daily lives so that they begin to express themselves, that they begin to grow into their best versions. And I think that how their elementary schools were structured, that their curriculum has really been more and more contrived and forced, I guess. And then it's been slipping further and further behind in the sense that we used to look at a second grader, that 7-year-old, give or take, who really started to sit at the table and break the code and manage handwriting and do all these beautiful academic things because they were developmentally ready to put all those pieces together. So if we can find a silver lining to some of the nightmare that we've had to live through these last 2 years, it is really that we're shining a light on what our systems have become. And so play, to me, even though you and I as an adult look at play as something that is non-directional or just something to blow off steam or something that kids do and we as adults don't. I also think a lot of us adults, grown-ups, leaders, think of play as something that we do when we only have spare time. That if the activity is not directing productivity, or if it's not striving for efficiency, and if it doesn't bring measurable results, then it's a waste of time. I think also us adults look at play, quote unquote, as guilty pleasure, that it's a distraction from, quote, real work. And I think we have taken that down into the elementary, preschool, even our toddler lives. And what I'm striving to really help parents and caregivers understand in their heart of hearts is that play is anything but trivial, and that it is truly a biological drive that is so integral in our human being that it can foster true health, balance, and that, Dr. Brown and many of his colleagues are looking at it as critical as sleep and nutrition. So with that in mind, today's session, I really want to cover those 7 play types because I think that's easy to apply into those first 5, 6, 8, 10 years, right? When we look at our children as babies and then as they begin to move about our home as toddlers, and then how do we really respect these play types and help them use their natural instinct to learn about the world, wire themselves as human beings, because that's what we're doing. And I've always said this, babies come to us under construction, and our daily life, our experiences are helping wire and finishing, building, constructing that brain, that wonderful mechanism, that organ that helps us think and feel and reason and create and be present. So last episode, I began to introduce the 7 types of play. They fall under the 3 formats. And what that means is the 3 formats I mentioned are free play, structured play, and mixed age play. Free play is exactly what it sounds like, that the children are really doing what they want. It's not adult-led, and that it really helps support their own motor, emotional, social, and cognitive growth and development, that they're in the driver's seat. And structured play is, like it sounds, that we are putting structures in, that we're helping guide them through an activity, and it still can have a sense of freedom in it, and it's very playful. So a teacher in the classroom, and I've always said this, if teachers make learning playful, such as learning math facts or letter sounds or sounding out words, if it's playful and the teacher is having fun, then the children will follow along. But structured play is also facilitating those kinds of lessons in the classroom, directing a playful group who's doing something, whether they're building or creating something together. It could be one adult and one child, like I do in many, many of my therapy sessions, and we're playing a board game. And with a 3-year-old, I'm introducing board games and really modifying the structure, but helping them have a feel of what turn taking or spinning or rolling the die and then moving an item, and really helping them with playing with materials in a joyful manner. And then there's that mixed age play that Dr. Stuart Brown's work really specifies how kids adjust their behavior when they're working or playing, and being together in a mixed age group. And there's a lot of benefits to that. So those are the 3 formats, and they can coexist too. So you can have some free flowing activities mixed in with some structure. Now, the 7 types of play, I introduced the first 3, and I'll review those briefly, and then we'll dive a little more into the remaining 4. So last week, I mentioned attunement play, where it's really between the caretaker. Initially, it's the mom and the newborn, and where they smile and snuggle, and their brains, their right hemisphere, the right cortex of both the adult and the baby really begin to light up and really are engaged with each other in that moment. And there's a mutual joy, a pleasure of whether you're just making raspberry noises or starting to introduce what peekaboo is by covering your eyes or a little soft blanket, but you're in it together and you're really building this connection. And I talk a lot about that as laying the foundation to early speech and language, and that this human connection is critical if we want our 3-year-old to have full-fledged conversations and to explain herself or himself, that without this connection at birth and in those first 3-6 months, it's really, really hard to build verbal communication if we don't have a solid foundation. The next play type is body play and movement. And I mentioned last week that this is really associated with exploratory body movements, when they start to wiggle and squirm before they even begin to crawl, but they're really feeling their body in this 3-dimensional space. It's much more open than in the womb, of course. And then they begin with experience and practice be able to control those motor movements. Then, as you understand, they roll over, they learn to crawl or scoot, they stand up, and they begin to walk and run, and all of these body movement play, that's play. You and I label it as play, but they're developing something remarkable and wiring their brain with their upper body, their lower body, their right hemisphere, their left hemisphere. They're coordinating it. The fine motor movements from their fingertips to the gross motor movements when they push themselves up, during tummy time, when they learn how to, walk upstairs, when they learn how to, climb up a slide, up the slide versus the ladder side, when they learn how to pump their legs on a swing. All of these motor planning, movement, stimulation is helping organize that brain and create these neural pathways that are efficient and effective and spontaneous and automatic. So the next type of play is the object play. Again, I mentioned that last episode where I shared that the curiosity about objects is pervasive in babies, in toddlers, and kids, and hopefully, long through their academic career and their life. But it's innate to them to reach out and touch things. And they don't know, like I mentioned before, they don't know what's safe and what's breakable, what's fragile, what's dangerous. They don't even know what that term means. But as a baby, they'll reach out and touch things on you and in their close vicinity. It's the whole hand and brain and hand really working together to try to understand how they can interface or engage with their immediate environment. And so I think the object play could be the most obvious to the lay person out there, or even the professional when you look at, educators or professional caretakers. But it certainly is the most familiar form of play, because that's why the toy industry has made billions and billions of dollars on us, because we're driven to understand that kids need to do something with their hands, right? Even babies, whether they have stacking cups or bowls, they play with plastic Tupperware with the lids, putting them on and off. The story where the kids enjoy the boxes that the toys came in more than the toys themselves, where they can, have some physical movement, but they're also manipulating to see how the sides work. They like to open and close things, pour things in, dump it out, pour it in, dump it out. If you really step back and you watch kids at play, what they do with the objects around them. And we as a society have tried to create quote unquote toys or objects that are safe for our kids to play. Of course, they can go outside and they can use sticks and rocks and mud, but they need some containers. Containers are important to manipulate and control and lift and all of these other kinds of play actions. Kids also really need to use their 5 senses during this object play. Well, with all of them, but you can watch them easily bang and bend, pull, squeeze, stretch, and taste. They're always going to put things in their mouths in those first couple of years. And because in the mouth, they collect a lot of data, a lot of information, especially, 18 months and younger. But then they move into toys that are a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more thought in provoking, such as puzzles or little farm sets or Legos, or I love the little people. And then they can move into more kind of open-ended, where they can be more craft-like, where they glue or cut or paste. They might paint or chalk, stringing things together with big fat laces. They use Play-Doh. All of, think of what a preschool playroom or your own playroom at home, all the different objects that we have provided for our kids to explore. And here's a key factor before I move into the other 7 different types of play. I really help parents understand how you can also rotate these toys and different objects and really understand where your kids are developmentally and what ignites them, and not to have this open-ended kind of mess or mayhem in your home or in their playroom, in the basement, wherever they're playing, but that there is some kind of structure and to help kids explore, because we can also talk about how novelty is important in learning and how the brain is really works best when you change it up. and that the same old, the brain gets bored, right? We all get bored, the same old, and we need a little bit of change. And it fits into the 80-20 rule that I've mentioned before. And I know that a lot of people on social media, a lot of professionals, and it's pretty common in my field to help parents understand how to rotate the toys. I think it's helpful for parents in their sanity that they don't just have, toys under their feet morning, noon, and night, but it also helps build the child's ability to organize and sort. And you can use cleanup as a learning opportunity, but also it's something that you can be playful with, right? Like let's race and see who can pick up more blocks or who can fill their bin fastest. Playfully and joyfully, and the kids jump in and do it. That it's not a quote unquote chore, that we're helping them build routine, that you take something out, you play with it, you be creative, and then you put it back, and that's part of our daily life. So now let me introduce the fourth type of play, and is social play. And this is really the big one. They're all big in my mind, but it really tells a lot about where we are as a culture, as a society, and helping kids understand or use these types of play to build their social skills, their understanding of how we as humans work with each other and get along and problem solve and all of these. But social play, the first stage, there are like 3 stages. The first is a sense of belonging, right? And that we, again, these play types are really intrinsic, part of our humanness, our biology, that we have an urge to be with others, to play with others, and to be accepted. And then there is also the celebratory type of social play, where we, gather for birthday parties or rock concerts, or we go to shopping malls, that we like groups of people doing the same thing. So it can be personal, like a personal dinner party or a personal celebration, but it's also large groups of people sharing a same thing, like 4th of July or a parade or going to a concert or going to an opening or all of these. So think of it small and large, but this whole celebratory play is part of our humanness to connect with other people doing similar things or appreciating the play event. So the third type of social play that I think it has been misunderstood for most of my career, and I've really had to help a lot of parents understand the need for it, the human drive, and all of the intricate levels of learning. And that's called rough and tumble play. And I know a lot of people out there, you listeners and parents, may have heard of that term, and that we've kind of over the decades have kind of separated that dads do the rough and tumble play and that moms do kind of the touchy-feely stuff. And that's very, biased and sexist and all of that. But the truth is, rough and tumble play, not only between an adult and the child, but children. And I've mentioned this before, shared a little bit about my upbringing in a very, very different time period, in the 60s and 70s and even in the 80s compared to today, where we have a lot of changes in our environment and the way that we raise our kids, our daily life, that tends to be more structure, tends to be more adult-led activities, and that the free child figuring it out in the neighborhood is not necessarily a given. So Let me describe what rough and tumble play is, what the benefits are, and really, respect parents in the sense that it makes them nervous or makes them uncomfortable. And I think as a culture, as a society, in our communities at large, we often discourage it and squish it because it makes us, the grown-ups, uncomfortable. And we're kind of saying we don't really trust the kids to self-regulate, to learn through this rough and tumble play. And yes, sometimes kids will get hurt, but they need to figure it out so they can build that strong foundation into older childhood and high school and become an adult that really has a good understanding and life experience with social play, different types of social play. So rough and tumble play is what we've all experienced or seen, where it's wrestling and tickling, chasing, pushing, pulling, bouncing, swinging, lifting, all those kinds of things. And as I said, being raised number 7 child of 9, we did a lot of this. This was our kind of daily habit. We used each other's as our toys. But rough and tumble play has been defined as physically vigorous behavior, such as the chasing, or we even, play. You can see kids play fighting, and it's accompanied mostly by positive feelings between the players. They're having fun. If you step back and you watch them, they're having fun. They're laughing. There are smiles. That rough and tumble play is social engagement with some physical contact, with positive emotions, and it's shared stories. Yes, it's vigorous. There's lots of jumping and swinging and chasing, like I said, but it's normal behavior and it's a natural instinct in all children at the preschool and early adolescence. And, then it does evolve into other types of things like sports, like football or basketball or baseball, where there are limitations, there are rules and regulations, but we understand what the boundaries are. So I think schools kind of started it, but parents, certainly were part of the conversation over the last several decades. With that, this type of play is often mistaken for aggression or misbehavior. And if you push a kid because out of anger or frustration, and that's a different type of physical involvement. And so I think that we have to look at it through a different lens, that rough and tumble play is more adaptive, is evolutionary, where we begin to understand how to interact with other human beings, respect their space. And that is part of learning how to be human. And it really does. The science supports that we're shaping the neurological network through this type of play. Even though some of you might be thinking, yeah, but it's noisy, it's dangerous, kids could get hurt, it makes me uncomfortable, but it's necessary if we want our children to understand boundaries and to respect other people and to listen to both their verbal and nonverbal cues that enough is enough. And when I say stop, I mean stop, that this hurts me, get off me, that I'm done being tickled. And that we can watch them from afar, and when it begins to cross the line, we could step in. But let them figure out where the lines are. That these kind of unstructured activities provide a huge opportunity for growth and self-discovery. And we, again, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, should not ban them. I mean, my goodness, I remember, starting school and just having pretty much unsupervised play on the playground 15 minutes before the bell rang. And my brothers would be swinging as high as can be, climbing up the bars and jumping on kids. We would be, wrestling around in the grass, but it was definitely unstructured and fairly unsupervised. And yes, kids got hurt sometimes and feelings got hurt sometimes, but we learned boundaries. We learned how to respect one another's limitations, and we knew who we could really wrestle hard with and who we had to be more gentle with. And so let me kind of walk through some of the key points to what rough and tumble play really means. So the benefits there, I've kind of done your heavy lifting and done some deep dives, but I found 6 benefits. That kids learn healthy risk taking, that kids feel free, right? When they let their bodies loose and they push the physical boundaries, and they really begin to understand what a healthy, controlled risk taking activity can feel like. So for example, they feel proud when they climb a tree or they jump from a high object. Through this kind of exploratory stage, they begin to assess the danger and understand when they can push the limit and when to hold back. Again, growing up with my 5 brothers, holy cow, one brother in particular, Timothy, really, really could push his limits, but he also had remarkable ability, agility, strength, coordination versus other kids. Now, as an adult watching hundreds and hundreds of kids on various playgrounds from preschool to elementary, I can see the kids. I can differentiate who are the big risk takers and who, like to keep in control, who really feed off and gravitate toward this movement, this action-based and wrestling around with other kids or getting other kids to wrestle with them. They want that too. And so it's if we step back and we watch our children with their playmates and with neighborhood kids or with Uncle Joe or, Aunt Susie, who comes and tends to go out in the backyard and physically play with them, you can see where your child is developmentally and how comfortable they are or are not with these kinds of play activities. So rough and tumble play also helps develop physical bond. And that's what I mean by, seeking other kids who will play with them and do similar activities, or the uncle or the aunt that will jump in and do that with them. So a physical contact is an important part of developing our close relationships, especially with children. This summer, I have included several home visits, which I typically don't, but because I'm transitioning out of my one-to-one clients and building this online business, reaching more parents like you, but I've been doing a lot more home visits. And a couple of families, I work with the siblings together. And I have watched this one particular family where they really roughhouse with each other, and they know the boundaries most of the time. What makes me nervous, where there's sharp, glass edges or metal pieces underneath the chair, and then that would be hard. But I've really had to encourage both the nanny and the parents in understanding that they need this. So they're 4 and 6 years old. It's a boy and a girl. And they're really, really building a relationship with each other, understanding how far they can physically wrestle. And yes, they do get hurt sometimes, not very often though, but it makes the adults in the room very uncomfortable. Well, I guess I have to be honest. Dad understands it a little bit more. He's a big guy and ex-military and all of that. But if we watch them from a distance and if we give them permission to do this, say out in the backyard, even though interestingly enough, they don't do it outside as much as inside. But I think that they're they're both at this phase, this developmental phase, this play phase where they're seeking that and they need that, especially after school. And since school has started and we've seen this escalate in, that those witching hours, whether it's, 4 or 5 and people are trying to get dinner ready or this or that. But we really need to understand that siblings will do that. They'll roll over each other. They'll jump on each other. To us, we think it hurts, but you watch them, they're giggling, they're laughing. And it really provides a balance of where they can play and not hurt each other. And I've really seen these particular children develop that over this summer. So the third benefit of rough and tumble play is that children build their emotional intelligence. That it's actually during this rough play that kids begin to differentiate what's fun from what could be hurtful. That they begin to judge as they look when other kids are either enjoying something or they're really getting hurt. And so they begin to see other kids' reactions and expressions. So children learn to address their emotional needs for the other kids. If someone gets hurt, oh, Susie got hurt, Joey pushed her, or he played too rough, right? They learn to stop and begin to understand when the line has been crossed. And if they need more adrenaline, and then they'll switch gears and go play by themselves or climb a tree or jump and do something differently or self-regulate and bring it back into kind of equilibrium. The fourth benefit to rough and tumble play gives good exercise for the mind and the body. That it's a physical type of play, so it builds strength. Exercising the muscles improves the gross motor skills. It includes flexibility, hands-eye coordination, and a better body emotional control. The fifth benefit to rough and tumble play is basically it's fun. And kids need fun. They need to feel joyful and gleeful and just expressive. It's also just easy. Children do have a lot of fun in this process. And there's something very exciting about that free form play when they can hold stuff and push stuff and throw themselves into this three-dimensional world and learn how that feedback helps really organize their human body, right? The mind and the body connection. So the sixth benefit to rough and tumble play is that it provides quote unquote heavy work. And if you've ever, met or worked with an occupational therapist or even someone like myself that works with early development, we talk a lot about proprioceptive input, and that is part of the sensory integration, the sensory development. And proprioceptive really means that a certain activity provides deep sensory input through the muscles and the joints. So we talk about our 5 senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, but we also have the 6th sense of proprioception. And it's critical for all of us because when our muscles and joints are provided with this type of feedback, it's very calming and helps organize our body intrinsically, internally, and then we begin to be grounded and organized in our physical environment. So think of it as getting a deep massage, like go to a really good expert massage therapist with some Ralphing or some really understanding of how to release the tension in your body. It could also be equal to going and lifting heavy weights and really getting that deep, deep sense of satisfaction physically in our bodies. Let's think about how sports or exercise has evolved over thousands of years. Think of what we deal with formal wrestling today, or football and soccer, basketball, gymnastics, fencing, swordsmanship, all of these activities, these play-based exercise and social events have to do with physical play and proprioceptive engagement. It's critical to our human development when we're young, and it should be carried out throughout our lifetime in some form or fashion. Now, some people gravitate more toward that, and other people need more calming kinds of things. But when we look at our children, when they're 2 and 4 and 6 and 10, it's important to give them this permission to do this exercise play and develop some of these skills. And so for you parents, don't be afraid to get down on the floor and play with your kids, to wrestle with them and tease and tickle and roll around in a blanket. You will love it too, and they will just really begin to understand that human connection through physical play can be positive and exciting and helpful. But I do want to kind of wrap this up when we are looking at rough and tumble play, to keep in mind some parental concerns, right? To make sure that it remains fun, that it's not punishment for some other kids and playful for some older kids, that parents do need to provide some support, some guidelines, right? To help them understand where the boundaries are. I remember going to visit my sister with her 2 kids that were, just about a year apart, and they were really into sword fighting, and it was a girl and a boy, and they were just always in it, always very, very active. And this is when they're 3, 4, 5. And it was always, yes, you could do that, but the swords aren't in the house, right? You can't really be swinging swords around. You're about 2 feet, 3 feet, and your sword is right close to the adult's face. So go outside, go outside, go outside. So there has to be some boundaries. And help the kids understand that I will supervise from a distance. You guys have this open-ended play, and I trust you to build your awareness of what's fair and what's good listening to your play partner, and that there are, consequences if you break some of the house rules, right? But to allow them that freedom, and to recognize that there will be accidents, and they will learn from that experience. Even if there are tears, even if there are bruising, that it's that they're learning in real time. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up today's episode. I needed to dive deep into rough and tumble play and social play. I needed to kind of help connect all of these dots, because it is so vital to our children, to their overall well-being, and to their lifelong kind of appreciation for play, and to find that balance during your daily routines and your activities. So look at attunement, your body play and movement, object play, social plays, those different types of urging, belonging and connection, rough and tumble play that I dove a little deeper into, and then of course celebratory as we go into the holiday seasons and look at how those things are part of our daily life and how we learn through those experiences. And some kids, when we have big parties, especially after these last 2 years, getting together with families or big party events are very anxiety provoking because they're not used to it. So we can talk more about how to help a child who gets overloaded or is ultra sensitive to change and newness and whatnot. But I wanted to lay this foundation really deeply of what is play, what are these different types of play. We will continue next week looking at what is pretend play and how critical that is, building the foundation to language and using imagery, their ability to narrate or story tell. And then the number 7 is really this transformative, integrative kind of creative play that's a little bit higher level, but it starts all in toddlerhood. And all of these types of play are important from birth through, up to kindergarten and first grade. However, like I said, if we think about how they can and should be part of our whole life span. When I think about, I think I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, my 20s, I was very, very serious. And it wasn't until somebody kind of introduced a road bike, right? Racing bikes to me, my late 20s. And I really started having more fun. And it really helped me kind of feel like I was a kid again, right? And it was the physical exertion, it was sweating, it was getting dirty, it was playful banter with other cyclists, all of that. And I really found a healthier balance in my life from, working hard and playing hard. But I would then bring that lightheartedness, that energy into my work, into my study, into expanding and building my practice. And that was back, in my late 20s, early 30s. And I really had 12, 14 years of hard play on a bicycle. And then, we switch, right? And we find a different play activity that still helps us be grounded, to nourish our heart and our soul and our joy, helps us regulate when we have cognitive exercises or that kind of work to do, and helps with our emotional regularity if we're going through a stressful period, whether you have to change jobs or you then decide to have children or you get married or get divorced or whatever the adult challenge is. If we have this kind of balance, and I know I don't like, I'm careful of using that word because I think life is complicated and there's never really balance, but you have this ebb and flow, you have different chapters, you have different seasons, different periods in your life in which you are faced with new learning, with new expansion, and we either step up to the plate and embrace it, or we cringe and hide and stay stuck. And that's a whole different conversation. But I think if we, as the adults, understand the critical piece to all of these different types of play and permit, give room for our children to develop that foundation, they will carry it into any academic setting. They'll carry it into their social experiences. They'll carry it into their problem solving and creativity and flow in their lifespan. And we want, even if we have a decade that is a challenge, like, I've shared with you my 20s, going through graduate school and losing my parents and having multiple moves and all of this. And it was a challenge, but I also knew it was temporary. I knew that I would get through this. And somehow I found some good social play that helped me regulate myself through all of the adult responsibilities that I was facing and having to manage. And so when we look at our children, whether they're 2 or 4 or 6, and they're playing by themselves and they're really enjoying that moment, let them do that. Let them be in that joy of exploring. And when they're with other kids, let them really enjoy that moment or that period, that experience. And if they're not enjoying it, then we have to rethink it. We have to say, well, maybe that's not comfortable. Large groups, large family parties or celebrations, that doesn't really jive with him right now. It's not comfortable. And we have to really step back and figure out how can we help them build and tolerate or understand and appreciate that? Or how do we limit those exposures? So that's a different conversation, but I think it's important to lay this understanding of how play, and again, I use that word in quotes because you and I as grownups look at it as play, but it's really one learning experience after another, after another, after another for our young children. And work to them is, going to school and learning how to read and write and sitting still and answering questions and minding, the rules and regulations and that's work. But play helps them be able to be physically, emotionally, and cognitively ready for formal education. Again, whether that's at your own kitchen table and you're homeschooling, God bless all of you parents. I think that is a remarkable path and journey to explore. Or you send them to a formal school setting and they have to then kind of learn how to comply in this group mindset. And that's, again, another whole different conversation. But laying the foundation and finding that balance of highly structured, kind of conformed learning and having a foundation of all of these varied play opportunities that have helped wire the brain, connect the mind and the body, become self-aware, become aware of others and presence in the environment, and building a little human who can have enough flexibility to continue to grow and learn in a wide variety of experiences. But that there are, and in I think 3 episodes, I will then bring it home into that there are different play personalities. And I think I mentioned this in the last episode that Dr. Stuart Brown's work, although it's not scientifically measured and lab tested, that there are these personality types regarding play, and how do we as parents and the caretakers, as a therapist and doctors, when we're in charge, what is our play personality and how can we reignite some of that to be a better parent, to be more present as a therapist, as a physician or a psychologist or whomever is working with our kids, helping understand how play is intricate in our overall well-being, our overall sense of self. There is a diverse body of play research that shows how play is central to leading a healthy, productive human life, that no matter what our ages, play is as important to our mental health as food is to our physical health. And that here's a short list of scientific evidence, and that you could Google this and dive deep for yourself. I'm trying to do some of that research for you and bring it to your awareness that babies need attunement, play in order to learn and grow, to be connected with us, that play builds a more complex human brain, that babies learn by moving, that play equals learning, that play develops emotional intelligence. Kids need rough and tumble play, like I dove into today, that play deprivation can actually have tragic consequences, and that in a nutshell, play improves our lives as human beings. So that's it for today. I, again, thank you so, so much for spending your time learning how to bring it with your kids, how to understand toddlers, how to build a home that nurtures love and independence through communication, through play, through socialization, and through opportunities to explore and really become the best version of yourself as a parent and then as your children learn to grow. So thank you so much for giving me this time, and I look forward to continuing this conversation on play throughout September, and who knows, maybe into October, in the sense that I think we understand what quote unquote academics is, but we forget that before we can sit at that desk by the time they're 7 and listen and learn in these very structured, contrived learning experiences, we as a human being need to be able to have an internal system that can tolerate that. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is to start with parents when you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, lay that foundation to prevent so-called quote unquote learning issues or developmental problems. It's all about prevention, or identifying where something is getting stuck early, and how do we mitigate that? How do we navigate this modern world and raise healthy, happy, prosperous young beings? And that's what I'm here. Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and I look forward to next week. So go out and play. You know that you want to get on the floor and just be a kid again with your kids. Do it. You can do it. All right. So don't forget to follow this podcast, subscribe. You don't want to miss any more episodes. And I will continue this conversation about play. If you want, I would love it for you to take a snapshot, share it. Let me know what you think of your play skills and what you think your kids are able to do. Do you want more of this deeper conversation on how we can help our kids develop into the best version of themselves? Let me know. And don't forget to share with your friends, your family, your colleagues. It's all about our children and how they feel about themselves, how they engage with others, and become this kind of just happy, gregarious, thriving, beautiful human that they were meant to be because of you. All right. God bless. See you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.